Hello and welcome everyone to the IFAD Innovation Talks. Today we will discuss how philanthropic organizations can contribute to scale food systems transformation. This session is organized by IFAD's Innovation Unit and the Global Engagement Partnership and Resource Mobilization Division in collaboration with the Global Alliance for the Future of Food. Before we start, I would like to remind you that today's event is being recorded and that by joining the event, you are agreeing to the recording taking place and for it to be shared in our platforms. As usual, I would like to invite you to visit our event page to check the speaker profiles, the events concept note, and the agenda. Our team is sharing with you the link in the chat box. If you are new to the IFAD Innovation Talks, these are a series of learning and knowledge sharing sessions lasting approximately an hour, where we aim to feature innovative approaches, tools, products, and services developed by IFAD, by our partners, and by members of the IFAD Innovation Network. If you're not a member of the IFAD Innovation Network yet and would like to become a member, please join us in the link that the team is sharing with you in the chat box. The chat box will be open at the beginning and at the end of today's session, so please feel free to let us know where you're joining us from. We ask that you use the chat box responsibly and limit your interventions to the content of today's session, please. We will close the chat box during the interventions of our speakers so that we can focus on the content. Without much further ado, I would like to introduce the topic of today's session. Big bets in philanthropy refer to large-scale, often multi-million-dollar investments aimed at driving significant social change. These initiatives are characterized by their ambitious goals, substantial financial commitments, and a high tolerance for risk. Unlike traditional grants, big bets seek to address complex systemic issues by providing enough capital to create transformative impact. However, they also come with a lot of challenges, such as the risk of overextending organizations or conflating growth with scale. Philanthropic big bets can play a crucial role in ensuring a more secure food future for everyone. But current data suggests that at the global level, philanthropic investments in rural areas are often insufficient. In 2022, approximately 40 private philanthropies reported to the OECD contributing $11 billion in support of development. While this is a valuable contribution, it accounts for only 5% of the total official development assistance from Development Assistance Committee member countries, which amounted to $211 billion in 2022. In today's session, we will explore groundbreaking financial innovations and strategies that are reshaping how global food systems can benefit from these partnerships with philanthropic organizations, with a special emphasis on empowering smallholder farmers, the backbone of global food production. A key aspect of our discussion today will be the role of philanthropic partnerships in driving transformative and sustainable improvements within food systems. We are fortunate to have with us a panel of esteemed speakers, bringing their wealth of experience and insights into these critical issues. To begin our discussion, I am honored to introduce a video message of IFAD's president, Dr. Álvaro Lario, with some opening remarks.
Good afternoon. I am pleased to welcome you to IFAD Innovation Talks and to this discussion on our efforts with philanthropic organizations to scale solutions for food systems transformation. IFAD is laser-focused on bringing positive transformation to rural communities in developing countries. So the most important innovations for us are those that directly impact farmers and rural entrepreneurs, helping improve their lives and livelihoods and enhancing their resilience so that they can take charge of their own futures. Through partnerships and engagements with organizations such as the Gates, Rockefeller, Visa, and Packard Foundations, we have facilitated the development, testing, and scaling of innovative new solutions for the problems faced by rural communities. For example, our work with the Visa Foundation to test and scale the Agribusiness Hub program created sustainable employment for rural youth through active engagement in agribusiness. And with the Gates Foundation and others, we're actively promoting sustainable agriculture growth through the African Agriculture Transformation Initiative, a nearly $24 million startup investment fund that promotes concrete sustainable agriculture interventions. In Sierra Leone, the Agriculture Transformation Office being set up under this agency will drive strategies to achieve national sovereignty and foster inclusive economic growth. Friends, at IFAD, we engage in social innovation. That means we don't only aim to think differently, challenge norms, and creatively address challenges with purpose. We aim to develop entire ecosystems that support farmers and rural entrepreneurs to improve their ways of working to deliver impact faster and more sustainably. The philanthropic community has also been using social innovation approaches, going well beyond funding to strategic investments that spark action. A great example is the joint philanthropic commitment of over $300 billion announced at COP28 to support farmers and others taking action on food systems and climate. Contributors to this investment include the Magnite Foundation, the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, and the Children's Investment Fund, all of whom are represented here today. Across the board, we're witnessing a surge in large-scale philanthropic investments supporting sustainable food systems. That's because it is now accepted that transforming food systems represents the most comprehensive approach to achieving the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So, as we look toward the future, the question at hand extends beyond whether big bet philanthropy can effectively scale food systems transformation. It must be about how we can ensure that these investments remain sustainable, inclusive, and impactful at the scale we need. So again, thank you for joining us today. Each one of you is here for a reason. You all play a crucial role in efforts to build sustainable, inclusive, and impactful food systems and creating a more just, equitable, and sustainable future for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, President Lario, for those insightful remarks, and especially for highlighting the importance of social innovation in improving the livelihoods of smallholder farmers and the key role of philanthropic organizations to make sure that the investments that we are jointly making are sustainable, inclusive, and impactful. Now, I'd like to invite Tonya Allen, President of the Magnite Foundation, to set the scene for today's discussion with her perspectives on the role of philanthropy in rural development and food systems transformation. Tonya, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gladys. It's so wonderful to be here with everyone today. And I'm really excited about scene setting the conversation. And what I would like to say is really to talk about what's possible. And as you all know, there's this wonderful quote from Nelson Mandela, which is essentially, it always seems impossible until it's done. And I think we have to walk into this moment and creating a moment where we can make sure that it gets done. And I do believe that big bet philanthropy is a big part of that. But as much as I think about big bet philanthropy being a critical part of creating innovation and opportunity for us to show up in a powerful way to transform food systems, I also think that we need to take a big bet on doing our work in a different way. And so I want to speak to that a little bit. So my grandmother, who I grew up under her wing, was a community organizer. She really worked on trying to solve issues in her neighborhood and her community, and she taught me some really important things. One of those things is that she always said, none of us is as smart as all of us. And I think that in addition to money, we have to make sure that we are bringing co-design, deep listening, deep understanding with the people and all of the actors in the system. Because we have money, it doesn't mean that we are smarter. It just means that we have access to resources. And so I would say from McKnight's work, and our global collaboration for food systems, what we have found is that our work, which we've done over decades all across the global South, has fundamentally been anchored by this belief that farmers know more, that the people who are closest to the problem have the best solutions, that they can inform that work. And so I would argue that big bet philanthropy isn't just about big dollars. It's also about acknowledging big ideas that are coming from the field and making sure that those people who are closest to the challenges and the people who are furthest away from power are the people that we ought to center, that they are the people that we need to be anchoring in this work if we really want to have sustainable solutions that actually meet the needs, and that people aren't scratching their heads after we've expended the dollars and said, what have we done? So I would argue that that will be an important part of what we need to do when we think about big bet philanthropy. I think the second thing is really about rewriting rules. And I define rewriting rule, that's my basic and most popular definition of power. How are we using our power to rewrite the rules? And rewriting the rules in big bet philanthropy is about like systems change and changing policies and legislation, and the way that we show up with financing to be able to drive the change that we're looking for. But I would also argue that rewriting the rules is also about how are we transforming as partners? Are we actually being really cooperative and transformational in the way that we're showing up with our partners as philanthropic institutions? And are we changing the way that we have rules? Like, what are we attaching to those resources? What demands are we putting on those resources? How are we making sure that people who have access to these resources can really use those things to change the rules that are actually influencing the lives of farmers, and especially as they are trying to execute agri-ecological practices that are going to be good for our earth in the long run. And at McKnight, we have been working on a project in our home state of Minnesota post George Floyd's murder. That's really about rewriting the rule. We call it Groundbreak Coalition. It's about essentially bringing financial institutions, government, philanthropy, nonprofits, businesses all together to actually rewrite and retool the financial system that will help increase wealth building for families who have been left out of the financial ecosystem for far too long. And so that work, it has thus far, it's a $5 billion project over a 10-year period in one region. We've gotten $1 billion committed to that work. And it has required McKnight to show up in a very different way. Yes, we've made I can't even think about the numbers, how many, we've made over $100 million commitment to this effort. But that money is not the most important thing that we are contributing in the time. It is how we're creating co-design opportunities, how we're relinquishing our power, how we're rewriting the rules, and how we're helping to introduce disruption into the work that will make the greatest difference for the people in our community. And we see that as well as our work across climate, as we have also worked with so many people in the Midwestern states to try and build their capacity to show up in a different way. But we're trying to show up in a different way with them as partners. And I think that's our real opportunity, is that if we want to get the impossible done, then we actually have to disrupt the way that we've been trying to do things. We have to disrupt our way of honoring people and valuing what knowledge looks like. We have to disrupt the rules that have created the conditions that we're in and that have created this stuckness that we need to break through. And then finally, I would just argue that if we really want to get the impossible done, that we got to look beyond money and be looking to ourselves about courageousness, about boldness, about why are we doing that? And that always has to be anchored in love. And if we always remember that philanthropy really is, its etymological definition is fundamentally the love of people, then big bets work. But if we forget those things, I'm not sure that we are doing it with the right intentions, and right intentions are essential to right outcomes. So thank you.
Thanks to you, Tonia, for framing the conversation so powerfully, and also for reminding us that to achieve a scale, we not only need financing, but also knowledge sharing and a change in mindsets on how we partner and collaborate. And thank you also for those powerful words at the end of your speech about the active and conscious intention to collaborate and scale innovation and contributions to an impactful future. Next, I'm pleased to introduce our panel discussants and panelists. Our panel discussant today is Ron Hartman, Director of the Global Engagement Partnership and Resource Mobilization Division at IFAD. Ron will lead us through a deeper exploration of the themes and strategies we began to uncover together by guiding a panel discussion featuring 3 representatives from key philanthropic organizations. Sonia Medina, Chief Ecosystem Development Officer and Executive Director at the Climate Change Children's Investment Fund Foundation. Masego Matsuamuse, Director of the Environment Program at the Oak Foundation. And Anne Lappe, Executive Director at the Global Alliance for the Future of Food. Ron, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Gladys, and a warm welcome to all of our participants who are joining us from all over the world. It's a very impressive and broad list of people who are joining. I'd like to start by just thanking President Alvaro Lario and Tonia for their challenging words at the beginning. The president of IFAD focused on innovative solutions and new types of partnerships, and taking a lead from Tonia and her grandmother's wise words about what's possible, rewriting rules, and disruption. So as Gladys said, we've got a really broad and rich panel who are joining us today. And as said in the introduction, there was I guess a thread of the same sort of thinking and approaches that got us to the position that we are today are not going to solve some of the issues that we face in the future around inequality, poverty, and hunger. So what I'd like to do is to perhaps challenge you to challenge our panelists through the question and answer function that we have in Zoom. The format for our session will be, we'll have an initial opening gamut of questions to each of our panelists. Then what I'd like to do is to open the floor for you to ask our panelists questions, and then we'll circle back to them for some key reflections around big bet philanthropy, and particularly what their views are of how we work in better partnership in a more innovative and equitable way. So without further ado, I will turn first to Sonia. And Sonia, at the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, you oversee efforts to strengthen philanthropic communities and institutions. So in your view, what are some of the big bets that philanthropy can leverage to drive food systems transformation? Sonia, over to you.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you to IFAD for hosting such an important conversation. We're all here because we believe that food systems can deliver better outcomes all around, and that's at the moment we are failing to live up to our expectations. Even during this talk, just to put things in perspective and to get a sense of the scale of the challenge that we are facing as a sector, $72 million of environmentally harmful agricultural subsidies will be issued within this hour, compared to just $1 million of climate financing for agriculture, 72 to 1. So I think the framing of the conversation is exactly right. We absolutely need big bets. And so let me offer 3 ideas just to get us going. The first one is that we need to articulate the North Stars of what that future food system that actually delivers looks like. My sense is that, and I have seen that we have so many different perspectives on food systems that we often get stuck in our differences rather than to rally around the commonalities of what we want to see. I think philanthropy can do this well. And we have a responsibility as a neutral broker to bring together the ideas and the processes that not only elevate local ideas, but also the big ideas of what the future system can look like that can deliver for nutrition, for local communities, as well as for climate. And some of those processes funded by philanthropy, like the Inland set of FAO roadmap, have taken us some of the way there, but so much more that we have to do. Number two, we need to help diversify food production. We know diversity is critical for nature, for nutrition, for climate mitigation, and yet we know that our food system currently relies on just a few strains of crop. And more importantly, we know that we are overly relying on livestock production. That's the big elephant in the room, or the big cow in the room. We know it's highly inefficient in so many ways and challenging, but this is where, as a philanthropic community, we need to join forces the most that we can, because we also know that big agriculture is one of the biggest political lobbies. So it is not enough to demonstrate good ideas of how a farmer could diversify from livestock. We actually need to create the political space for the voices that of reform to actually be heard, because that $72 million to $1 million reflects that they are winning the political narrative. On insecurity, food insecurity, climate change, and etc. Number three is, and I hinted with my opening indicator number, agricultural subsidies need reform. And as philanthropy, we have created and supported diverse civil society ecosystem that have won big on very difficult systemic reforms in the past. We have done it for renewables, we have done it for electric vehicles, we have done it in other really difficult areas. We need to get together, we need to collaborate big if we are to take the agricultural lobby and be successful in reforming agricultural subsidies. Without that, we will always be in the margins and we will be always outgunned. So thank you for convening this, and I really hope to collaborate with many of the people in the on the panel and everybody online.
Thanks very much, Sonia. And hopefully our audience will come back and ask you a little more around how to create that political space, how to reform agricultural subsidies, etc. But one thing that you said is around the North Star and sometimes how we get stuck. And this is a good segue into Masego, because the Oak Foundation has recently commissioned 2 studies to learn more about local solutions, providing direct support for farmers in Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, and Asia. And this is also very true to the work that IFAD does, localization and listening and empowering people to drive their own development. So, Masego, what would you say are some of the key takeaways that can shift global food systems towards greater sustainability, security, and equality and equity, particularly in the global South? Over to you.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you to all the previous speakers for touching on issues that are pertinent. I think on that question of what is the North Star and how do we get unstuck, I think it's first starting with how we're conceptualizing food transformation and transitions, particularly looking at small-scale farmers. And in our context, one of the things that we get to understand, especially looking at the global South, is first and foremost, small-scale farmers are also fishers too. Right? So there is that interconnection between looking at the nexus of food systems within terrestrial environments and food systems within the marine environment. And looking at that as well is touching on the point that Tonya at the beginning spoke about, and Sonia also speaks about it, which is around power and political capital. And it is really around looking at the ways in which we can center justice, equity, and inclusion, and in particularly resourcing in a way that we are building people power and the capacity for self-representation and ideation. And this providing funding for the social movements, for the small-scale farmers and small-scale fisheries communities to facilitate horizontal learning and collaborative efforts so as to take on the bigger political economy questions. The other that is around centering justice and equity, and is one area that we pay attention to, particularly looking at the Global South, is the questions around the human rights and labor rights that emerge within the food system. So for us, transformation therefore then goes beyond looking at questions that get in the way of increasing production, but also looking at the quality of lives and the lived experiences of people that are driving the transition. You were asking specifically about the Global South studies that we commissioned. I wanted to actually go back to the why we commissioned those studies. We were focusing on the Global South because we were asking ourselves, if we're going to push the social tipping points that are fundamental for driving food transformation, where do we need to look at? And the Global South happens to be the place where we have the global majority. And at the same time, when we look at the production systems, it's the place where production systems are very much informalized and they remain small scale and driven by small scale drivers and small scale fisheries. We also looked at historically the distribution of philanthropy resources and recognized that one of the fundamental things that we need to be having a conversation around is how we rebalance the flow of resources. That rebalancing of the flow of resources is one fundamental big bet that we ought to lean on as philanthropy. We take inspiration from what we have learned in terms of progressive efforts in the climate community that my colleague Sonia alluded to. But we also look at the trends, right? Like we were looking at what in the climate community, looking at what the experiences over the last 5 years have been. Some of the trends that we pick up is we're seeing growth in the volume of funding that is going into the field, but we continue to see disparities around how we are funding, right? So if we look at the last 4 years of climate funding, we have about 400 million out of 1.3 billion of funding that is available to the US and the European regions being delivered through core flexible support, which basically means it becomes available for groups to support their own ideation processes, horizontal collaboration, and the visioning processes that they have. In contrast, when we look at how much is delivered to the Global South, we're seeing that although there's been an increase, and we've seen an increase of, say, 580 million being available to the Global South regions, with an average of 70 million, only an average of 70 million out of that 580 is delivered through core support and flexible core funding, right? So pointing to us the need to really change the way in which we're delivering funding. You were asking specifically about the studies, and going back to what I said about centering the groups and the populations and paying attention to who shapes the agenda and whose voice is being centered. For the Global South studies, we looked at insights from Africa, Asia, Caribbean, and Latin America. And we leaned on researchers and scientists in those geographies who collectively were bringing together, on average, 30 years of expertise. Coincidentally, it so happened that the researchers were women from the Global South. A nice accident in the sense that when you actually also look at the majority of food producers in these geographies, a lot of small-scale fishery sector and small-scale food systems are in fact driven by women. So we wanted people who could bring in their own lived realities as part of the centering the science and the insights that are coming from this, but also drawing from the populations that are shaping the agenda. What did we find? And I will end with like really just 3 takeaways from this study. Tony, I see you're about to unmute yourself. And it was firstly to really debunk this idea that the infrastructure doesn't exist and there's no capacity in the Global South, we came across more than 120 philanthropic support institutions. By this, I'm talking about coalitions, civil society organizations, networks, and movements that are working at an intersectional level. They're working on food systems and other issues as a true reflection that on the ground, people don't leave single life issues. So when we're looking at transformation, we ought to situate it within a multisectoral perspective. Secondly, is that engage in the coalitions and the civil society philanthropic support institutions in the Global South provides invaluable benefits in both understanding the ecosystem, the context, and that is really instrumental for shaping the vision going forward. Lastly, is just the idea and the importance of putting our big bets on building better relationships and improving the practice of giving. And this is centering around trust and the trust dividend that we need to shift to the Global South-led institutions. Over to you, Ron.
Thanks, Ms. Agor. Thank you very much for highlighting the need to engage the Global South as a partner and the capacity that's there from your studies. And I was also really interested to hear about the need to rebalance the flow of resources and the conclusion that you've had around resources not actually arriving where they need to be. Colleagues, please do keep the questions coming in the Q&A. This is an innovative panel session, so we want to challenge each other's thinking, and it's good to see that there are some challenging questions coming in. So we'll revert back to that very shortly. I'd like to pass the floor now to Anna. And Anna, as Executive Director for the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, you work with a whole range of foundations, including those that are represented here. From your vantage point, how can philanthropy best support food systems transformation? And what call to action would you issue to foundations as they work to transform food systems to create a better, more sustainable future for all? Over to you, Anna.
Thanks so much, Ron. And I feel like I could listen to Sonia, Masego, and Tanya all day. I'm really inspired by all that's been shared. And a lot of what is coming up for me is really an echo of what you've already heard. As you mentioned, at the Global Alliance, we work with philanthropic partners, including those you've heard from already, as well as partners in civil society and the public sector all around the world. And from our perspective, we really see such a critical role for philanthropy to play in scaling solutions for food systems transformation, because we're really clear-eyed. I think, like a lot of the you listening, we're really clear-eyed about what a profound transformation is needed, and that we really need all hands on deck, that we are painfully aware that today our food systems are key drivers of really some of the most thorny and yet I would argue most fixable problems of our time, that we know that 80% of biodiversity collapse can be tied back to how we grow our food, what we grow, where we grow it, that we know that global food systems are responsible for 1/3 of all of the emissions that are driving our climate crisis, and that we know that all of this is alongside an incredible epidemic of diet-related illnesses, again, very preventable, alongside staggering numbers of hungry, despite the fact that we grow enough food in the world to feed us all. So I feel like we all know, we're all fired up because we know that food systems transformation is so needed, and we need it now. And when I think about the role of philanthropy, I like to think of what you already heard Tanya Allen share. She likes to remind us that this word philanthropy, it comes from the Greek philos, meaning love, and anthropos, meaning humanity. And that from our perspective, when you have philanthropic institutions that are guided by such a love, by deep core values, and grounded in fundamental principles of food systems that are good for people and for the planet, that when you have philanthropic institutions acting from that place, that we can see really powerful, positive catalytic action. And you've already heard from Sonia Masego some of the work that they're leading in their work. And so how do we think about then what is this kind of big bet role for philanthropy? And I see it in a couple ways, one really obvious and maybe a couple not so obvious. So in the most obvious way, we can be making much bigger bets in terms of moving money. But as you've already heard from our inspiring speakers already, that it's not just how much money you're moving, but how you're moving the money and where you're moving the money. And so from our perspective, we're really thrilled to be seeing so many of our Global Alliance members and other partners scaling up their philanthropic investments for healthy food systems, and doing that from a philanthropic perspective that we, from philanthropy, can help de-risk capital. When we do that, we can help support this transition that we so need to regenerative and agroecological food systems. And we can do so while ensuring social justice and equity values are embedded in food systems transformation. And so we're seeing that kind of step up for bolder action among our members and many others. Last year, we launched a call to action for a tenfold increase in philanthropic investments in such a transition. And we know many more are joining us. And we see this significant need for, again, more investment as, yes, it's a big bet, but we also know what are the consequences if we do not make these investments. We know that our current global food system has about a $12 trillion cost annually to all of us. So it's not as if not taking action has no financial impact on all of our lives. So yes, we can really call upon our philanthropic partners and other investors to scale up investments, but also, as you've heard from other speakers, that for us, the other form of a big bet is how we deepen our investments in building power and helping resource advocates to ensure that the public sector works in the public interest, not under the influence of corporate lobbyists, and to ensure that the private sector also works in the public good. And so we're seeing kind of the fruits of this power building with the spread of policies, for instance, like good food procurement, ensuring that public dollars spent on food goes to good, healthy food, goes to really resource food producers, both on the land and on the water. And we're seeing it, you've heard earlier about efforts around the world to really address subsidy reform, to think about how do we ensure that our subsidies are going to support farmers and fishers, incentivize them in using more ecological approaches. And as Sonia mentioned, the importance of growing a diversity of food. So for us, this big bet, it's moving money, it's ensuring that building power, and then it's also the role that you've heard that philanthropy can play in connecting more deeply across different sectors and silos, that we really see this powerful role about bridge building and convening power of philanthropy to drive the systems change that is so needed. So that's what I wanted to share with all of you. That's my top level thoughts, and so inspired by what we've heard, that again, philanthropy, it's really not just about moving dollars. It's really also about moving systems change and supporting democracy. That philanthropy, again, driven by love, can help unlock the billions needed for an ambitious change agenda and give voice to communities around the world for their own self-determination to support the kind of transformation we need to have a food system that actually delivers on health, biodiversity, and helps stabilize the climate.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Anna. And there was a lot of terrific points there, particularly around some of the challenges and some of the solutions and the role that philanthropy can play. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll take a little bit of moderator's license to see if I can cluster some of the very good questions coming in and put them perhaps a little unfairly to each of our panelists. So if I could cluster a first set of questions, which I would say is around sort of access to finance. You've seen there are some questions in there of farmer organizations that are lacking access to finance for technology. There's also different types of organizations and groups that need access to finance to scale up some innovations that they have. And there was one reference to agroecology approach. And there's also a question around what's holding donors back from investing big time. Sonia, if I could go to you perhaps around, how does funding flow, and how do partners access funding from philanthropy? And what is your thoughts around how funding can be scaled to support innovations and to transform food systems? Maybe to you first for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Ron. So I think the difficulty is on accessing finance is what I was alluding earlier. I think there is just innovation is really great, but it needs to have a system where the innovation then it has a pathway to a scale that is supported by a regulatory system and a pathway towards commercialization that is clear. And I worry about fragmentation of different funds all over the world, where there is not a lot of commonality with regards to how do they add up to more than the sum of their parts. So when donors are approached, it just feels that every single one of these funds is slightly different, and there is more of an attempt to underline the differences of the approaches versus how everything will add up. The other thing is I strongly believe that it's not only about fundraising for the innovations, it's about resetting how agricultural subsidies is set up. So we really need to take the reform and the resetting the policy space in a much more deliberate way. Without that top-down perspective as well, no matter how much innovation or how much money we throw at the local level, it won't scale. So I think we need both.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Masego, if I could go to you now. There was a couple of questions which looked at engagement of the Global South. There's one question around how those areas that are most remote can get support. Small island developing states, East Africa was mentioned. Building on what you were saying before about properly engaging and making sure that resources flow. What's some of your reflections of how those populations that are most remote, often forgotten, maybe more expensive to reach, can benefit from big bet philanthropy and investment? Over to you.
Thank you, Ron. I think that's a really good question, and I would say practically, it's around the big bet philanthropy resources in terms of money being available to the network of re-granters, intermediary, capacity building, civil society coalitions that are operating in those regions. One of the examples that I'm most excited about is the conversation that Agroecology Fund is having with the African Food Sovereignty Alliance that covers more than 50 countries in the continent and works directly with small-scale farmers associations and their movements. And that collaboration also connects with the small-scale fishers networks within the continent and within the context. So what we are seeing is entities that are working collectively and building on their respective niche and respective areas of expertise, and building on networks of networks to ensure that those resources reach the groups that are needed. What is also inspiring about that example, I mean, it's the Agroecology Fund, it's AFSA working closely with one of the most efficient re-granters we've seen in the continent, Trust Africa. What I like about that is the idea of providing accompaniment to the groups, right? So it's not just about deploying the resources, but it's providing capacity building support. It's providing think tank and conceptual and analysis support that supports their policy advocacy work. It also provides support to rights education. And, Anna was talking about the way in which we use philanthropy to deploy and strengthen building democracies and strengthening democracies. So by building on these networks of networks, we're seeing groups pull together their resources, both financial, technical, and the reach capacity to work together and facilitate that horizontal collaboration.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Anna, a tricky one for you. There's been a few questions around transparency with philanthropy. Transparency over decision making, transparency over investment, and power dynamics. There's also a question around the role of philanthropy in the United Nations. I wonder if you could reflect a little bit as an alliance around what is philanthropy thinking about that? How do you ensure transparency? How do you ensure that things are locally owned, locally driven, and have the right kind of sustainable impact? Over to you.
That's a great question. When I think about the question, I think about how much I've seen shift. I mean, I've been working with funders for about a decade now, and how much I've seen in terms of the how funders are doing their grant making and approaching the work. And Masego mentioned the work of the Agroecology Fund, where I was an advisor for many years. I think it's a great example of how philanthropy is looking at how do we really bring in the knowledge, the wisdom of partners on the ground to not just receive the funds, but actually be an active role in helping to identify where there are powerful community-led opportunities to invest in. So it's really thinking about building power, not just building power in the sense of ensuring that groups on the ground are resourced to build power in their own communities, but actually building power in financial flows, building power within the philanthropic sector to shift who has voice in those institutions. And so Agroecology Fund is one model. Thousand Currents is another philanthropic partner that we work closely with. That, again, is an intermediary that's really about resourcing grassroots communities around the world. But I would say across our members and across philanthropy more widely, there is this conversation about how do we ensure that we are really responsive to needs on the ground? How do we think differently about power within philanthropy? I'm seeing it among many of our members that are, for instance, family foundations, thinking about how do we actually think differently about who sits on our board of trustees? You know, how do we really look at, as I mentioned before, not just how much we're giving, but how we're doing it, knowing that the how is just important as the how much. So I've been really thrilled to see that this kind of transformation happening in the sector, and I think we're seeing it not just in food philanthropy, but in other philanthropy as well. And I think, again, it speaks to this role that philanthropy can play in supporting new ways of working and new collaborations. And from our perspective, when we really look at the systems change that needs to happen, the only way you create systems change is having many more people having power, many more people having voice. So I've been excited to see that transformation happening.
Excellent. Thank you very much. There has been a few comments around the huge issue of climate. And I think Anna, in her opening intervention, mentioned around just its importance, and I guess the terrible irony of agriculture both being seen as a key contributor to climate change in a negative way, but also being such an important part of the solution going forward. But despite that, there isn't enough investment. One of our participants mentioned around the underinvestment in adaptation versus mitigation. Us at IFAD are always signaling the chronicle underinvestment in small-scale agriculture, which is less than 2% of climate financing going to those people that grow our food and particularly are responsible for agriculture and land use in developing countries. I just wanted to maybe go back to Masego. Your reflections on the issue of climate, particularly from a global South perspective and adaptation, and what are you doing at the foundation to support a redistribution of resources reaching those that need it most?
Thank you. I mean, that's a really good question. I think the starting point with that would be to signal the positive shifts that we're seeing. If we compare where we were 2 years ago on that question of how much goes to adaptation and how much goes to mitigation, we've seen a positive shift in the community to give more funding to adaptation. One, it is out of the recognition that when climate lands in place, impacts first land in places, and the first response is for communities to adapt, right? Especially in regions that are most vulnerable and don't have the the capacity to respond at the speed and scale that is needed. So we do have those positive shifts. The other is around the emphasis that we're beginning to see on the sectors and on the people that we're investing in. And it's this increase in the giving and the funding that is going towards regenerative agriculture. And at the foundation, we have launched a new sub-program. It's a nascent program, but it's a new sub-program where we've got a much bigger movement growing around it on regenerative landscapes and supporting small-scale farmers, firstly in Southern Africa with the idea to upscale it to other parts of the continent and to Latin America. What that investment is doing is building on a pre-existing movement that is at a global level and has been largely driven from the global south, the agroecology movement, and supporting the work that small-scale farmers have been driving and the innovation that is coming from that sector. We're beginning to see an increased attention to the potential role that regenerative agriculture plays in transforming food systems at a global level as well. So we've got a positive political narrative that is beginning to emerge and shape how the community is funding those sectors. So I think that we're beginning to see some really positive shifts in the field, and I believe that in the next couple of years we will really not be having this question that is a dichotomy between do we give to mitigation or are we giving to adaptation. We're beginning to accept that the two are two sides of the same coin, and we need to deploy resources that allow for both mitigation and adaptation to be the first response that we are supporting for climate.
Thanks very much, and certainly agree. And events like today that hopefully bring together joint advocacy from different institutional partners to bring that voice, to ensure that coordination and to change that dynamic are really critical. We're unfortunately very tight on time. I would have loved to have heard from Sonia and her perspectives on climate and adaptation. But what I'd like to do now is just circle back to each of our three panelists, if with a 1-minute intervention, if you can. Your main sort of points to leave our audience today, if you're able to summarize in 1 minute, what would you like participants to go away and think of when we come and think about big bet philanthropy? And I'll start with Anna, Sonia, and then Masego. Anna, over to you.
Great, thanks. Well, I'll pick up on the climate theme to say that for us, taking action on climate is taking action on food and vice versa. That we see a couple of years ago, we did a study that showed that less than 3% of climate finance is going to food systems transformation, even though food systems, as I mentioned earlier, are driving a third of all of the emissions causing the crisis. And so for us, a call to action is to really scale up investment. Again, climate finance being just one kind of investment in food systems, ensuring that actually it is going to mitigation, adaptation, and going to a transformative agenda grounded in principles of agroecology and regenerative agriculture. And as an alliance of philanthropic institutions, we are really committed to being part of that drive to think about how we work together in new ways, collaborate in new ways, do this very difficult systems change work together. And we see the togetherness of being both working within philanthropy, but also bilateral, multilateral institutions, investors, private sector, and community advocates on the ground. So for us, we are our call to action is, again, how do we make these bigger bets from a place of love and from a place grounded in principles of food systems transformation. So thank you for having me. And it is about 5 a.m. here in California. So thanks for the inspiring, Sonia, Masego, Tanya. So inspiring and definitely worth getting up for. Thanks.
Thanks, Anna, and thanks for the commitment getting up so early. Sonia, over to you. What's your takeaways?
Yeah, plus to Anna. I mean, I think collaboration guided by a North Star of the transformation in the food system that we all want to see is the way to go. We need to be more than the sum of our parts. and collaboration with multiple diversity of voices is the only way in which we are gonna have the muscle and the bandwidth and the engine that will give us the momentum that we need to win at the end. I think that goes to some of the questions from the audience on accountability, and we all have a piece of the answer, but the answer won't reveal itself until we are together in the job. I would just say that we are talking about at the risk of simplifying, but I think we need to be clear that one, we have to do the reform of the industrial agriculture, where we are talking about these people are not farmers, they're industrialists. Okay, this is big agriculture, and that approach will require a different set of strategies and voices and local stakeholders in a certain way. That's the fight in the US, in Europe, in Brazil, in other places where agricultural reform is going to be the most important. That's one. I think that is differentiated to the revolution that we need to unlock for small scale farmers in the global south and in other places where it is more about the nutrition, it's about economic empowerment, it's about women, etc. Both are needed, and sometimes I feel that we mix the two. So I would just call this community to be clear in start differentiating the strategies. We need to create a coalition that wins on both, bearing in mind that the diversity of the difficulty in countries will obviously show up in different ways. But I'm up for the fight and I'm up for the job, and I look forward to collaborating with all of you in making that reality happen.
Thanks, Sonia. Thank you very much. Masego, over to you.
You'd have seen my big smile. I'm really energized by Sonia and what Anna also had to say. And just to say that, you know, I think the place to end is to really say the big bets matter, and we definitely need more big bets in the food sector and transforming the food systems. I think that we also need to be really looking at, as I said earlier, really paying attention to whose voice tells the story and whose voice shapes the narrative. So Tanya, Sonia's point about, fighting agribusiness. And here it's really centering and providing the support that allows us to center communities, small scale farmers in shifting the power. Right. And the other point is around growing and enabling a new generation of partners and actors. We ought to ask ourselves, who are we missing in the space? And who do we need to be taking a big bet on and risking on? Making the investments as risk-taking investments that we know are going to yield transformative change. Lastly, how we fund matters, and really investing on the relational issues and the trust that we spoke about. We are committed to horizontal collaboration, to cross-learning with others, and collaborating in deploying the resources in this way. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we're out of time. So it's left to me just to thank very much you for your participation, thanking our panelists for being very open and very flexible and providing your very rich responses. And to our colleagues, both at the Global Alliance for the Future of Food and IFAD for putting on the event today. We very much appreciate the different viewpoints that have come in. We will record all of the questions, many that we didn't have time to touch on in any detail today, and endeavor to get back to you. If I can revert back to the president of IFAD and Antonia in their introductions, which really indicated that we need different thinking, we need different approaches, we need to challenge each other in a more systematic way. We need more systematic thinking if we're to really tackle the peril of growing hunger, inequality, and poverty. Us at IFAD look forward to continuing to build new and innovative partnerships and to working with many of you that are on the screen with us today. So with that, I'll pass back to my colleague Gladys. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ron, for those closing reflections. And again, to our panelists and to everyone that contributed to today's event. I would like to thank in particular a couple of people that really made today's event possible. Special thanks to Nima Mgana for all the great work that she put into developing the partnerships to bring the panelists together today and the content of today's session. To Julia Martorana, Chiara Marabotto, Carmela Lopez, Chichimi, and Ziping Yan. And I would like to invite you all to join us at the IFAD Innovation Network as we're planning to launch initiatives this second semester of 2024. And we'd like to ensure that everybody gets a chance to participate in our future innovation talks, but also in our IFAD Innovation Network cafes that we will be launching soon. Thank you very much for participating and see